Did you know that some of your favorite movies were actually chopped up and changed before they hit theaters? Have you ever wondered what these films would look like if the directors got their way? Well, good news. Many of these classics are now available in versions that are much closer to what the filmmakers originally imagined. Stick around because we are diving into 15 incredible films that you can finally experience the way they were meant to be seen. Blade Runner. Imagine creating a masterpiece and then watching someone else tear it apart. That is exactly what happened to Ridley Scott when he made Blade Runner back in 1982. The studio forced him to add a happy ending and put in a voiceover narration that Scott never wanted. For years, fans watched this version and loved it, but they had no idea what they were missing. Then in 2007, something amazing happened. Scott released the final cut, and it was like watching a completely different movie. The narration was gone, which made the film feel more mysterious and let viewers figure things out on their own. The ending was darker and more thought-provoking. New special effects were added to make the future Los Angeles look even more incredible. Some violent scenes that were cut out came back, making the action more intense. The final cut runs about the same length as the theatrical version, but every minute feels more meaningful. This version turns a good science fiction film into an absolute masterpiece about what it means to be human. You can find the final cut on most streaming platforms and on physical media, and trust me, once you watch this version, you will never want to go back to the theatrical cut. Apocalypse Now. Redux Francis Ford Coppola made one of the most intense war films ever created, but even he felt like something was missing. The original Apocalypse Now from 1979 was already nearly 3 hours long, so the studio made him cut a lot of material. Fans loved the movie anyway, but Coppola always knew there was more to the story. In 2001, he released Apocalypse Now Redux, which added almost an hour of new footage. This was not just random scenes thrown back in. These were important moments that helped explain the characters better. There is a whole section at a French plantation that shows how colonialism affected Vietnam, giving the war more historical context. We get more time with the Playboy bunnies, which sounds fun but actually becomes quite sad and shows how the war affected everyone. The characters have more conversations that reveal their thoughts and fears. Some people think the extra hour makes the film too long, but others believe it makes the journey into madness feel even more real and exhausting, which is exactly what Coppola wanted. The Redux version helps you understand why these soldiers are falling apart and makes the horror of war hit even harder. You can stream this extended version on several platforms, and if you have the time, it is an unforgettable experience that will stick with you for days. Kingdom of Heaven. Here is a movie that almost nobody liked when it came out in 2005, but there is a twist. Ridley Scott made a brilliant historical epic about the Crusades, but the studio got nervous about the length and cut out almost an hour of footage. What people saw in theaters felt rushed and confusing. Characters showed up without proper introductions. Important plot points were missing. The story jumped around in ways that did not make sense. Then the director's cut came out on DVD, and suddenly everyone realized they had judged the film too harshly. The director's cut adds 45 minutes and transforms the entire movie. A major character who barely appeared in the theatrical version becomes central to the story. You get to see how the hero learns to become a leader instead of him just suddenly being good at everything. The political intrigue makes sense now because you see all the scheming and planning. Battle scenes are longer and more spectacular. The themes about religious tolerance and finding peace become much clearer and more powerful. Critics who hated the theatrical release called the director's cut a masterpiece. It is now considered one of the best historical epics ever made, but only in this longer version. The theatrical cut is almost like watching a different, much worse movie. You can find the director's cut on most streaming services, and it is absolutely worth the extra time. This is one of the biggest improvements any director's cut has ever made to a film. The Lord of the Rings Trilogy. Peter Jackson created 3 amazing movies that won a total of 17 Academy Awards, but even those theatrical versions were not the complete story. Jackson filmed so much material that he could have made 6 movies instead of 3. The extended editions add hours of footage across all three films, and while they are definitely longer, they are also richer and more satisfying. The Fellowship of the Ring. Extended Edition adds scenes in the Shire that make you love the hobbits even more before they leave home. You get more time in Rivendell and Lothlorien, which makes these elf kingdoms feel more magical. The Two Towers Extended Edition includes more about the Ents and their decision to go to war, which makes that storyline more powerful. There is also more development of the relationship between Aragorn and Eowyn. The Return of the King Extended Edition adds the amazing scene where Saruman finally gets defeated, which was completely missing from theaters. You also get more of the battle at the Black Gate, and a longer ending that some people love and others think goes on too long. These extended editions do not change the stories in major ways, but they add depth and detail that make Middle-earth feel even more real. True fans consider these the only versions worth watching because they include so many character moments and world-building details that flesh out Tolkien's vision. You can find the extended editions on most streaming platforms, and while they do add several hours to your viewing time, they make the journey through Middle-earth even more unforgettable. The Abyss. James Cameron has a habit of making movies that studios think are too long, and The Abyss is a perfect example. This underwater science fiction thriller came out in 1989, and while it was exciting, something felt incomplete. Cameron had filmed an entire subplot about nuclear weapons and the threat of war, but the studio cut it all out because they wanted a shorter, simpler movie. The special edition came out later and added about half an hour of footage that completely changes what the film is about. In the theatrical version, the aliens just seem curious about humans. In the special edition, they are actually angry about how humans treat each other and are considering wiping us out. They create massive tidal waves all over the world as a warning, and you see news footage of these waves about to destroy coastal cities. The main character has to convince the aliens that humanity is worth saving, which adds huge stakes to the story. This makes the ending much more emotional and meaningful because it is not just about saving a few people in an underwater station anymore. It becomes about saving all of humanity. The special edition also includes more character development and relationship drama that helps you care more about what happens to everyone. Cameron has said that this longer version is the real movie, and once you watch it, you will understand why. The theatrical cut feels like it is missing its heart. You can find the Abyss Special Edition on various platforms, though it can be harder to track down than some other films on this list, but it is definitely worth the effort. Aliens James Cameron shows up on this list again because he is another director who always has to fight studios over runtime. When he made Aliens in 1986, he created an action-packed sequel that also had real emotional depth. The theatrical version was great, but the special edition adds about 20 minutes that make it even better. The most important addition is a scene at the beginning where Ripley learns that her daughter grew old and died while Ripley was floating in space for 57 years. This completely changes how you see the rest of the movie because now you understand why Ripley becomes so protective of the little girl Newt. She is not just saving a random child. She is trying to replace the daughter she lost and get a second chance at motherhood. The special edition also includes more scenes of the colonists before the aliens attack them, which makes their fate more tragic. You see families living normal lives, not knowing what is about to happen. There are more scenes of the Space Marines preparing for battle and showing off their weapons, which builds tension. The colony itself gets more screen time, making the setting feel bigger and more real. Some action sequences are extended, giving you more of the intense battles between Marines and aliens. These additions do not slow down the movie at all. Instead, they make you care more about the characters and understand their motivations better. Many fans consider the special edition the definitive version of Aliens because it balances action and emotion perfectly. You can find this version on most streaming platforms, and it makes an already great movie even greater. Cinema Paradiso. This beautiful Italian film from 1988 won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film, but most people have only seen a shortened version. Director Giuseppe Tornatore made a movie that was originally over 3 hours long, telling the story of a famous film director remembering his childhood in a small Italian village and his friendship with a movie theater projectionist. The version that won the Oscar was only 2 hours because the studio cut out almost an hour. For years, this was the only version available and people loved it. Then the director's cut was released, and suddenly the film had an entirely different tone. The original version is sweet and nostalgic, focusing mainly on the friendship between the boy and the old projectionist. The director's cut adds back a major love story that was completely removed from the shorter version. You see the main character as a teenager falling deeply in love with a girl, and their relationship becomes tragic and complicated. There is a reason why they never ended up together, and the director's cut reveals this heartbreaking truth. The film becomes less about innocent childhood memories and more about lost love and regret. Some people prefer the shorter, sweeter version, while others think the director's cut is more honest and powerful because it shows that growing up means losing things you can never get back. The longer version is definitely sadder and more mature. Both versions are worth watching, but they almost feel like two different films. You can find Cinema Paradiso in both versions on various streaming services, and comparing them is fascinating. Donnie Darko. Sometimes a movie becomes a cult classic even though hardly anyone saw it in theaters. Donnie Darko came out in 2001 and completely flopped at the box office, but then it became hugely popular on DVD because teenagers and young adults connected with its weird, dark story about time travel, mental illness, and the end of the world. The theatrical version was already confusing on purpose, leaving lots of questions unanswered. Then, director Richard Kelly released a director's cut in 2004 that tried to explain more of what was happening. The director's cut adds about 20 minutes and includes graphics and text that explain the rules of time travel in the movie. Some scenes are extended to give more information about the characters. The soundtrack is changed in several places, using different songs that create a different mood. Here is where things get interesting, though. Many fans actually prefer the theatrical version because they think the mystery is what makes Donnie Darko special. When the director's cut explains too much, it takes away some of the magic and makes the story feel less open to interpretation. This is one of the rare cases where the director's cut might actually be worse than the original. However, if you found the theatrical version too confusing to enjoy, the director's cut might help you understand and appreciate the story more. It really depends on whether you like mysteries that leave you guessing or prefer movies that explain everything. Both versions have their fans, and you can find both on most streaming platforms. Watching both and deciding for yourself is the best way to experience this strange, fascinating film. Brazil Terry Gilliam has fought with studios his entire career because he makes weird, imaginative movies that executives do not always understand. Brazil from 1985 is his masterpiece about a dystopian future where bureaucracy has taken over everything and one man tries to escape into his dreams. The studio absolutely hated Gilliam's ending, which is dark and sad, so they created their own version for American television that had a happy ending. Gilliam was so angry that he took out a full-page ad in a Hollywood trade magazine asking when his movie would be released properly. Eventually, his director's cut came out, and it is much better than the studio version. The director's cut is longer and weirder, and does not apologize for being dark. The main character does not get a happy ending. Instead, the film shows how totalitarian systems can break even the strongest spirits. Dream sequences are longer and more surreal, creating a strange contrast with the gray, depressing real world. The humor is darker and more satirical. Side characters get more development, and the whole bureaucratic nightmare feels even more suffocating and real. The studio version tries to make you feel good at the end, but Gilliam's version makes you think and maybe even feel a little disturbed, which is exactly what he wanted. The director's cut of Brazil is now considered one of the greatest science fiction films ever made, and an important warning about government control and loss of freedom. You can find it on various streaming services, and while it is definitely not an easy watch, it is absolutely brilliant. Have you been watching movies wrong this whole time without even knowing it? Dark City Alex Proyas made an incredible science fiction noir film in 1998, but the studio did not trust audiences to understand it. They forced him to add a voiceover at the very beginning that explains the entire twist of the movie before it even starts. Imagine watching The Sixth Sense, but someone tells you the ending in the first minute. That is what happened to Dark City. The theatrical version ruins its own mystery immediately. Fortunately, the director's cut removes this terrible voiceover and lets the story unfold naturally. Suddenly, the film becomes a puzzle that you get to solve along with the main character. The director's cut also adds scenes that were removed, including more footage of the strange strangers who control the city. The mystery becomes deeper and more unsettling. There is more world building that helps you understand the rules of this bizarre place where it is always night and memories can be rewritten. The ending is extended slightly, giving more closure to certain storylines. The director's cut also improves the pacing because scenes flow into each other more smoothly without the awkward cuts that the studio demanded. Dark City is now recognized as a groundbreaking film that influenced The Matrix and other science fiction movies, but only the director's cut lets you experience it properly. The theatrical version feels like watching a movie with someone constantly explaining what is happening, which destroys the atmosphere and suspense. You can find the director's cut on most streaming platforms, and it transforms Dark City from a confusing mess into a haunting, unforgettable experience. Daredevil superhero movies are everywhere now, but back in 2003, they were still figuring out how to make them work. Daredevil starring Ben Affleck got terrible reviews when it came out, and many people thought it was just another bad comic book movie. However, the director's cut tells a very different story. The theatrical version was cut down to less than 2 hours and focused mainly on action and romance. The director's cut adds over 30 minutes and includes an entire subplot that was completely removed. There is a whole courtroom drama involving one of Daredevil's cases as a lawyer that connects to the main villain's criminal activities. This addition makes the film much smarter and more complex because you see both sides of Matt Murdock's life, the lawyer and the vigilante, working on the same case. The longer version also develops the relationship between Daredevil and his best friend Foggy much better, showing why their friendship matters. The violence is more intense, and the film has a darker, grittier tone that fits the character better. The theatrical version felt like it was trying too hard to be family-friendly, but the director's cut embraces the darker aspects of Daredevil's world. While the director's cut does not turn Daredevil into a masterpiece, it does make it a much better film that takes its characters and story seriously. Many people who hated the theatrical version found that the director's cut was actually pretty good. You can find it on various platforms, and it is worth giving this movie a second chance if you dismissed it years ago. Watchmen's Zack Snyder adapted one of the most famous graphic novels ever written, and he filmed almost everything from the source material. The theatrical version of Watchmen from 2009 was already pretty long at over 2.5 hours, but it still had to cut a lot. Then Snyder released the Ultimate Cut, which adds nearly an hour of footage and includes an animated story within the story that was in the graphic novel. The Ultimate Cut has an entire subplot about a kid reading a pirate comic book, and this comic reflects and comments on the main story in interesting ways. Just like in the graphic novel, these animated sections appear throughout the film, creating layers of meaning. The Ultimate Cut also extends many scenes, giving characters more time to talk and develop. The ending has more footage that helps explain the villain's plan and makes the moral questions at the heart of the story even more complicated. Some of the superhero backstories are expanded, so you understand why these people put on costumes and tried to save the world. The violence is more graphic, which matches the tone of the comic better. The Ultimate Cut is definitely a commitment because it runs nearly 3.5 hours, making it longer than most directors' cuts. However, for fans of the graphic novel, this version is much more faithful and complete. It includes almost everything from the source material and creates a richer, more complex story about power, morality, and what it really means to be a hero. You can find the Ultimate Cut on streaming platforms, but make sure you have plenty of time because this is not a movie you can watch in pieces. The New World Terrence Malick is known for making beautiful, poetic films that do not always follow traditional storytelling rules. When he made The New World in 2005 about Pocahontas and the founding of Jamestown, he created a film that was more like a visual poem than a typical historical drama. The studio cut down his original vision significantly for theaters, and while the theatrical version was still beautiful, it felt incomplete. Malick has actually released several different versions of The New World over the years, but the extended cut that came out on home video is the most complete. It adds about 20 minutes and includes more footage of the natural world and the Native American way of life. There are longer scenes of Pocahontas experiencing English society and feeling trapped by its rules and customs. The love story between Pocahontas and John Smith is developed more fully, with additional quiet moments that show their connection. The extended cut also has more voiceover narration that gives insight into what the characters are thinking and feeling. Malick's films are not for everyone because they move slowly and focus on images and emotions more than plot, but the extended cut of The New World gives you more time to sink into the world he created. The relationship between the Native Americans and the English colonists is explored with more depth and nuance. The film becomes even more meditative and sad as you watch two cultures clash and see Pocahontas caught between both worlds. You can find various versions of The New World on different platforms, but the extended cut is the one that best represents Malick's vision. Once upon a time in America, Sergio Leone created epic Western films that changed cinema forever, and his final movie was his most ambitious. Once Upon a Time in America tells the story of Jewish gangsters in New York across several decades. Leone made a film that was nearly 4.5 hours long, but the studio completely panicked. They cut the movie down to just over 2 hours for the American theatrical release, and, even worse, rearranged the entire story to be in chronological order instead of jumping through time like Leone intended. The result was a confusing disaster that made no sense and destroyed Leone's reputation right before he died. Fortunately, longer versions were eventually released that restored Leone's vision. The full extended director's cut is now available, and it is considered one of the greatest films ever made. At its full length, the film has time to develop its characters over decades. You see these men as children, as young adults starting their criminal careers, and as old men dealing with regret and betrayal. The story jumps through time in ways that create mystery and make you piece together what happened. The pacing is slow and deliberate, letting scenes breathe and giving actors time to create real, complex characters. The cinematography and music have room to create mood and atmosphere. This is not a fast-paced gangster movie full of action. Instead, it is a meditation on friendship, memory, betrayal, and time. The extended director's cut is long, but every minute matters. It is a masterpiece that was almost lost forever because of studio interference. You can find the full version on various platforms, and while it requires patience and attention, it rewards viewers with one of the most powerful and beautiful films ever made. The Exorcist. One of the scariest movies ever made got even better when director William Friedkin released a new version in 2000. The original 1973 film terrified audiences and became a cultural phenomenon, but Friedkin always felt like some scenes that were cut should have stayed in. The version you have never seen before, as it was called, adds about 11 minutes of footage. The most famous addition is the spider walk scene where Reagan, the possessed girl, walks down the stairs backward in an incredibly creepy way. This scene was cut from the original because the special effects were not quite right, but improved technology made it possible to fix the problems. The extended version also includes more scenes of Father Karras talking to other priests about his doubts and his mother, which makes his character deeper and more sympathetic. There is a different ending that some people prefer because it is more ambiguous and unsettling rather than providing complete closure. The longer version includes more medical tests and examinations, which makes the possession seem even more horrifying because you see doctors unable to explain what is happening. Some scenes are simply extended to build more tension and atmosphere. The additions do not change the basic story, but they enhance the psychological and spiritual horror that makes The Exorcist so effective. This extended version is now considered by many to be the definitive cut of the film. You can find it on most streaming platforms, and if you thought The Exorcist was scary before, wait until you see the spider walk scene.